Hello, everyone. Welcome to this insightful conversation with our guest, Jon Paul, a former Army veteran turned high performance coach dedicated to helping veterans heal from trauma. Today, we will delve into their journey, the impact of discovering PTSD, the power of forgiveness, and much more. Let's begin this inspiring discussion. Thank you, Jon Paul, for joining us today. So, my first question is to you that can you tell me more about your journey from being an army veteran to becoming a high performance coach focused on helping veterans heal from trauma?
Yes. Hey, good evening over there, Mohammed. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to support you and the good work you're doing. And that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. My journey to becoming a high performance coach was really a logical next chapter in my life because I've always found myself in leadership roles in my military career. And that required me to make sure that the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that worked for me were mentally, physically, and emotionally trained and prepared to perform any mission we were given. As you know, the more prepared you are in any area of life, the more you're capable of achieving, whether it's in your relationships, in your career, or just socially. So, a key part of my approach to coaching and mentoring involved helping them to see they can be and do so much more than they believe, and then helping them develop the habits and skills to actually achieve it. That includes helping them heal from trauma, whether the traumatic event happened in wartime or whether they were still, when it happened, if it happened when they were a child. Trauma is trauma, and all unresolved trauma prevents us from showing up and being our best and achieving the things we want out of life. So, in essence, the Army taught me the value of continuous learning. There's value in continuously challenging ourselves to strive for more, to become a better person, to learn to identify and overcome obstacles that get in our way, like unresolved trauma, and developing new skills or practices that lead to more confidence. And when we have more confidence, that generates more courage, which we need to overcome greater challenge, which inevitably show up in all of our lives. And nowhere is our ability to overcome obstacles challenged more, I believe, than in the area of unresolved trauma. Overcoming trauma and regaining a sense of control over life can be especially scary and challenging. So, having a coach who understands that and serve as an accountability partner makes it so much easier and effective because you're not going through it alone. You're not going through that tough period in your life alone. We can grow and achieve so much more when we work with someone who's experienced in an area of our life we want to make improvements in, like making peace with our past and our past trauma. And that's why I honor you, Mohammed, for the work that you're doing in the area of forgiveness. Learning the art of forgiveness, in my view, is the essential first step in healing our individual and collective traumas and stepping into our greatness. I serve the veteran community because it's full of good people who have experienced significant wounds and no longer feel safe with connecting with people and operating in their environment as the best versions of themselves, whether it's at home, at the office, or socially in their community with friends. They often simply don't know what the next step is to take. So I help them take that first step to becoming whole, and then the next one to rediscovering their greatness. And that's what you do, I think, for your community too.
Right. So, as you learn about PTSD 11 years after retiring from active duty, could you share how this discovery impacted your life and your decision to become a coach?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, would it surprise you to hear it was a blessing for me? It was a relief because it meant that the source of my wounds wasn't out there, wasn't external. They were in here, and that meant I could do something about it. For as long as I can remember, I've been asking questions about myself, my life, my family, how I got to this point in my life, and why do I struggle so much with certain things. Think about patterns that continuously appear in our life that challenge us. Why does that happen? For me, part of my challenges was interpersonal relationships. Why was I so good at my military career, but not so good in my personal relationships? I always struggled with them and wondered why they came so hard to me. I thought there was something wrong with me. Like I just had some personality defects that I simply had no choice but to live with. So when I got my diagnosis, that led to a discovery of how disconnected I was from my authentic self. And forgiveness helps us reconnect with our authentic selves. Not only that, discovering that I'd been living with more than a dozen symptoms of unresolved trauma for most of my life meant that I really wasn't defective. I thought I was defective, but I really wasn't. And that was such a relief to me. It meant the only thing that was really wrong with me was that I had wounds that were unhealed. I didn't pay attention to them. And I know from my Army training, we can heal from our wounds if we know how. But I also began to ask new questions once I knew I was living with a bunch of unresolved trauma. So if I went undiagnosed for so long, how many other veterans are living with this too? How many other family members are affected by that too? And even beyond the veteran military community, to include the community you serve, Mohammed, how many people are living with unhealed trauma, and how is that affecting the quality of their life? I personally believe it's an epidemic around the world today that we really, really need to pay more attention to. So in the end, I didn't really fail at my relationships. Those failures, those experiences I labeled failures, all that heartache and anxiety, that was my body's way of trying to get my attention. It wanted me to know I was showing up in them as a wounded person, not as my best, most authentic self. And that's not anyone's fault. Rather, it was the effect that came as a consequence of being blind to the presence of my wounds and my failure to take responsibility to heal them. The cause was being disconnected from myself and the behaviors I developed out of a need to cope and protect myself that were destructive. The effect was I got into some really bad relationships. But there's a lesson hiding in every one of our experiences, including the bad ones. And I like to say to people, a lesson will be taught until it is learned. In the end, I don't see it as failure, really. I saw it as an opportunity to learn and grow. We just have to be willing to change the way we look at our challenges to see the lesson that is hiding inside of them. And that's why when I got my diagnosis, I didn't run away from it. I ran to it. I embraced it and looked for the lessons in it. And when I did that, the answers to so many questions I'd had about my life started to come to me. And for the first time in my life, I felt clarity about who I am and my life's purpose to serve others. And I got help from coaches just like you. That's why I want to give back to my community in the same way that you and I are doing now.
Amazing. So forgiveness is a powerful aspect of healing. How do you approach the topic of forgiveness in your coaching practice, especially concerning unresolved trauma?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Mohammed, because you're absolutely right. Forgiveness is a very powerful aspect of healing, and so many people overlook that the fact that we have that gift inside of us already to be able to forgive, but we just don't take advantage of it. We sometimes it feels like we'd rather suffer instead of resolve the situation in our life, and it doesn't have to be that way. I believe there's more than one way to approach the topic of forgiveness for sure. And that's what makes it such a rich tool for us to take advantage of. And one of my approaches is based on a specific type of trauma called generational trauma. It's also known as intergenerational trauma. And this type of trauma exists in family structures. I believe it exists in every family structure around the world where unresolved trauma that is experienced by members of our family and our community that came before us is handed down to succeeding generations. It's all done subconsciously, so we aren't even aware that we're doing it, but it happens. And essentially, it's passing wounds from one generation that didn't solve them to the next. And it continues like a cycle, and it accumulates until someone in the family comes along, sees it, understands it as something that needs healing, not something that we need to keep hiding and keep a secret from others, and then makes the decision to take whatever actions are necessary to break the cycle. Let me give you an example from my own life. In my family history, and I'll just go back 2 generations to my grandparents. My family is Dutch. My father was born in the Netherlands. My mother was born in Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony known as the Dutch East Indies then. Her parents were also Dutch, but they were born in Jakarta, in Indonesia. They experienced discrimination from Dutch citizens that were born in the Netherlands. They were treated as inferior because of that. And if you had a native Indonesian in your family, there were penalties to pay. One of my relatives who served in the Dutch army married an Indonesian girl and could no longer be promoted because of that. But my family also experienced World War II firsthand. Back in Holland, my father, as an 8-year-old boy, witnessed the Nazis occupy his town and do terrible things there. In Indonesia, everything that was familiar to my family was taken away. My grandfather was taken as a POW by the Japanese army and died in Burma, which is now Thailand, just a few short months before the end of the war. His dream was to work with Walt Disney, but his life was cut short by the war. Meanwhile, the rest of my family, which included my grandmother and 4 children, including my mother, spent the whole of World War II in a Japanese concentration camp, where they experienced so much horror and constant threats to their survival. Just imagine being 8 years old and having everything taken from you and being treated like less than human for 4 years. And after it's all over, you're expected to pick up your life and carry on as if nothing happened. Well, there's no such thing as trauma in this world. Back in World War II, for sure, and no doctor was qualified to take care of you. So there was no outlet. There was no way to give expression to the raft of emotional overwhelm you had to suppress. You're simply expected to get over it and restart your life. So what do you think would happen in those situations when children whose nervous systems have been overwhelmed by war, abuse, neglect, or dysfunction grow up and start having families of their own? Well, their children become easy targets of the unresolved pain that they kept suppressed. Not deliberately, of course. It all happens subconsciously and shows up as abuse and neglect and dysfunction. And how does that affect the next generation? Maybe as an inability to form deep connections with others or achieve educational or professional goals. Maybe as addiction or as perfectionism or people pleasing or eating disorders or self-esteem issues. And that's what happened to me. Both of my parents, particularly my mother, were in so much pain from their unresolved trauma that it was inevitable that they give expression to it in unhelpful ways that affected me. It wasn't their fault, though. Trauma was not understood then, and there's no treatment for it. No treatment existed really until the 1980s, and even then, most people wouldn't have qualified. So there is so much forgiveness work to do. It's happening again today. We see what's going on in Gaza, for example, and Ukraine. I believe especially the work we need to do, the forgiveness work with our mothers, because we have all been the recipients of unhealed trauma that affected them. It was handed to to us from our parents, who received it from theirs, who received it from theirs. There's really no one to blame. Does that answer the question for you,
Right.
Mohammed?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
could you explain the concept of post-traumatic growth and how it relates to the process of forgiveness and healing for veterans?
Sure, sure. Well, post-traumatic growth is a positive psychological change that can happen after a traumatic event or life crisis. It's based on the theory developed in the mid 1990s by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. Post traumatic growth doesn't deny that something overwhelming happened, a traumatic event. It happened to us. It was abuse and dysfunction by parents who themselves were wounded that led to my traumatic experience. For others, it could be neglect, abandonment, systemic injustice, or racism, for example. Post traumatic growth doesn't deny any of those things and that any of those things happen. Instead, it proposes that adversity can actually lead to changes in how we understand ourselves, our communities, others in our environment and the world. And the changes can include new awareness, new insight, or perspectives into ourselves and others. It can include new possibilities for seeing what we share in common with each other versus what differentiates ourselves from each other, and to build bridges to ourselves and others, just like what you and I are trying to do right now together. There could be new ways of relating to others or developing personal strength and more resilience, creating change on a spiritual level, which the practice of forgiveness does absolutely do, and developing just more appreciation for the sacredness of life. I view forgiveness as highly fundamental to creating opportunities for post traumatic growth, because practicing forgiveness, as you know, leads to seeing new possibilities for ourselves, relating in a more positive and constructive way to others, developing resilience, enhancing our spirituality by remembering who we really are at our core and living from that place and serving others from that place in the present moment where we create our futures, and then having more appreciation for the life we've been given and our purpose to move through trauma to growth. I educate veterans I work with about what trauma, and specifically unhealed trauma, is. It's a disruption of our core belief systems. Then we discuss ways to move through trauma to enable our growth, our post traumatic growth. This might include learning how to self regulate, learning to express our emotions, which comes so hard, especially to men, learning how to speak our truth in ways that help us reconnect with our authentic self, improve our relationships with others, and finally, being of service to others who are on a similar journey. So much is possible on a personal level, family level, community, and global level by learning the practice of what I call the radical forgiveness.
Right. Many veterans may feel isolated and without access to support. How do you create a safe space for them to connect, heal, and grow?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because it's all about creating safety and security in the people that we work with so they can actually do the work and feel good and comfortable and safe doing it. Anyone who needs support and doesn't get it can feel isolated, especially when we look to our closest relationships first as a source of support. It's really, really fundamental to our need for love and belonging. Before we can even uh, chase after our need for love and belonging, we must feel safe first. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs shows us that after our physical needs for food, water, shelter, clothing, rest, and safety are met, we need love and belonging. Having that enables us to develop our need for self-esteem and self-actualization, which is simply becoming the best version of ourselves that we dream of becoming. But it's not just a dream. I view it as a drive that's pulling us toward it. That can be scary if we feel isolated, unsupported, and unsafe. So in my practice as a personal development, as a high performance coach, one of my first priorities is to create a safe space for my clients. And I do that by being empathetic with them. I make sure that they see me as someone who values them, respects them, and wants to understand them. And because I serve the veteran community, I speak their language. So there's commonality between us. And that's a huge barrier that we as coaches try to work with our clients to overcome. That's my invitation to connect with me. Since I speak their language and we can relate to many of the same experiences, that level of relatability by itself opens the door to generating just enough trust to connect with me on a deeper level. And sometimes it takes more than one conversation, and that's okay. People are scared to be vulnerable, but that's exactly what we need to create an environment that leads to forgiveness and healing. A lot of people have been through a lot of bad things, and they fear being judged and isolated even more. Their willingness to trust and be vulnerable might be seriously damaged. And so it's in their willingness to be a little bit vulnerable to me that makes it possible to form a new connection. And it's a process that continuously unfolds. Once they realize, hey, this guy really wants to see me and hear me, they feel empowered to let their guard down with me. It's in our willingness to be vulnerable that we are then able to create and make new choices that lead to healing and personal growth. And that's really where the magic happens. But that's where the irony is here too, Mohammed, because most people believe they can think their way through problems. And that includes the veteran community too. We're very good at denying our feelings and believing we can just think our way and solve through any problem that we have. But connections with others are felt, they're not thought. While we need discernment to decide who we want to connect with, forming new connections with people and maintaining those connections with the most important people in our life is primarily an emotional exercise, not an intellectual one, which forgiveness is very, very effective at helping us address. Finally, I also believe being an attentive listener is important. All of the people I work with have kept stories hidden within themselves for a very long time. Letting them tell their stories and feel the feelings that accompany them in a safe space is the first step toward letting it go. And that's how we achieve more inner peace with ourselves and build resilience that empowers us to grow. It's really a beautiful process of unfolding, often for the very first time in their lives. And I know that you've experienced that too as a forgiveness coach.
Right. What specific strategies or techniques do you use to help veterans make peace with their past and visualize a more positive future?
Yeah, these are such great questions. Thank you, Mohammed. I teach a modality of forgiveness called radical forgiveness. It's a 5-step spiritual practice that is aligned with the world's religions, but goes deeper, I feel, to achieve a more complete outcome. All of our lives are full of stories about our past and stories about our future. These are stories about our life experiences. Many of our stories are happy and exciting. They tell us a lot about who we are and what we want in our life and who we connect with that in ways that makes life fulfilling. But we also have stories about our life experiences that have been painful to us and have left us feel victimized in some way. It might be a bad breakup with someone in a relationship. It might be getting fired from your job or becoming ill. These are stories of regret about things that have happened to us or things that we have done to others. There are also stories of worry and anxiety about the future. It's so important to see this, whether you practice forgiveness or not, because it's in the stories we tell ourselves that we're creating our future. It doesn't happen in the past because the past is over and we can't change it. We don't create our future in the future because the future isn't here yet. and we can't really totally control what's coming. The place where all of us create our future is only in one place, and that's in the present moment. You are determining your happiness right now. Your future is unfolding because of the things you think about and believe right now to be true about yourself. And then you've developed habits and skills and practices to fulfill it. But it's based mainly on our stories of regret about the past and worry about our future. And that's where we invest most of our energy, which leaves very little for us to use in the present moment. Most often, it's not enough to create the kind of future we really wish we could have. So, radical forgiveness involves telling your story of victimhood, feeling the feelings around that story. Then I have a technique for collapsing the story, reframing it into a new story, and integrating a different story into every cell of your being. It's a process of taking your personal power back, because we all give our personal power away. But we do it subconsciously so that you have more power in the present moment to create the life that you want. It's in collapsing the story, the third step in the process, where most people create a breakthrough, because this is where they learn to separate the facts of what happened in their stories from the interpretations we give to it. And there's a big difference between the two. The pain we carry from unresolved events from our past contains clues that help us create that breakthrough. And what I'm saying here is that it's not only crucial to get in touch with the feelings and emotions that are part of the stories we tell that keep us stuck in our victimhood, it's required and it's key to healing those wounds and transforming our life. Because so many people, especially men, as I've said, struggle with giving expression to their feelings. They're afraid it makes them look weak or ineffective, when in fact it's an ineffective act of weakness to deny our feelings and ignore what they're trying to tell us. More precisely, it's an act of fear to ignore certain feelings, but it's unavoidable if you want to make peace with your past. I'll digress here for just a second, because this bit is really important and it's worth emphasizing. Forgiveness isn't an intellectual act that we do from time to time. First and foremost, it's a spiritual practice that helps us stay connected with our authentic self, who we really are at our soul level. Imagine a world where we're all connected with our authentic self. It would be a very different place that we live in today. My point is, all of us are spiritual beings having a human experience in a human body. That human experience isn't just a physical and intellectual one, it's an emotional one too. And we tend to believe we can think our way through life, but we really can't. Our emotional self is the only place where happiness, joy, aliveness, fulfillment, and inner peace exists. And to deny that part of ourselves is to deny us so much joy and happiness that we can achieve. We can only reconnect with our authentic self when we replace our tendency to be self-critical toward ourselves with empathy, self-compassion, and a desire to learn and grow. So when we apply that in radical forgiveness, we're able to see more clearly that the facts around what happened in our story are simply the facts. We can't change them. But we can look at the interpretations we added to our story and find clues there about what we believe to be true about ourselves. These beliefs are always disempowering because that's where the pain is. And the only person that's keeping them there is you, is the victim. They always limit us, which keeps us in some repeating cycles of painful experiences, like losing our job, painful breakups, issues with our health, or issues with our wealth. And some examples of limiting beliefs might include, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, or I don't deserve it, or I'm not lovable. If I can get a client to discover his or her limiting beliefs when we collapse their story, they've taken a giant step toward creating a breakthrough for themselves. Why? Because the limiting beliefs we have about ourselves aren't true. They were planted there by our parents or our primary caregivers, who themselves were wounded people. And nobody tells us we can change the beliefs we have about ourselves. The process of radically forgiving is a process of self-discovery, where we discover we are the creators of our own lives and we can make it anything we want. So once they discover their core limiting belief, the next step is to reframe their story with a more empowering belief and then integrate it so it permanently replaces that old narrative that guided us. That action frees up so much energy that they have invested in maintaining their stories and limiting beliefs that now need to be channeled into something else. And that gives us the perfect opportunity to channel it into developing new habits and skills or practices that improve the quality of their life and sets them up for greater happiness and success, whether it's in their most important relationships, their career, or their social life. It's really a wonderful process and such a gift to be able to help people make these breakthroughs. So that's radical forgiveness in a nutshell. I'm sorry, this is a long answer, Mohammed. It's a spiritual practice designed to help us remember who we really are and take a step back to that person who is our authentic self. It's based on a belief that life happens for us, never to us, that every experience contains a learning and growth opportunity, and that we are not only meant to be on this journey, but we wanted to have these experiences in order to see more clearly our separateness from each other and return to who we really are, all of us at the core of our being.
Amazing. Can you share a success story or an example of a veteran you have worked with who experienced significant transformation and healing through your coaching?
Sure. And this story is really typical of the clients I've worked with, both male and female. Let's see. My client was a man in his early 40s. He came to me for help to save his marriage. He was experiencing a lot of pain and difficulty in his marriage and was desperate to save it. So we agreed to do radical forgiveness work on the relationship he had with his wife. It was really strained, and he wanted to save it if he could make it, and even make it better. But he was nearing the end of his patience and his ability to change the course because he didn't have the insights or the skills to manage his situation anymore. So in step 1 and 2 of radical forgiveness, which is tell the story and feel the feelings, I listened as he described his home life. His wife seemed to be an angry person and verbally abusive toward him and their 5-year-old son. There were also a few episodes where she was physically abusive. And on at least one occasion, my client found marks on his son, and that raised huge concerns. At that point, he knew things were going from bad to worse, and he shared that his wife seemed to have lost interest in keeping their home tidy and preparing healthy meals for the family. She preferred fast food instead and watched a lot of TV. And whenever he tried to address things with her, it seemed to make things worse, not better. She seemed to grow more angry and distant from him, which only made the situation more desperate, more frustrating for him. He felt like he was losing control of his marriage and his home life, and he didn't know where to begin to put things back together again, because he also understood the environment that he lived in was affecting his young son as well, and he wanted to do something about it. So now, just to be clear, he didn't see his wife as an angry person, but rather a sad or even depressed person that often withdrew from participating in life with him and their son. There were angry outbursts, but they happened when her sadness was overwhelming. He desperately wanted to help her, but he couldn't figure out what the source of her sadness was. And he was also struggling hugely with expressing his feelings around the situation, both to me and his wife. So we worked very hard on feeling the feelings. After he finished telling the story of his situation at home, I asked him to tell me about his childhood and specifically focus on his upbringing and what his life at home was like. And to make a long story short, it turns out that the experience he had with his mother was very similar to what he was seeing at home now in his wife's behavior. He remembered his mother wasn't emotionally present or available to him. She didn't seem to care about his health and welfare. She didn't clean the house or cook very much, and watched a lot of TV and argued a lot with his father, her husband. Consequently, he didn't have a good relationship with his mother anymore. And in fact, they hadn't had a substantive conversation in years at the time that we started working together. So when we collapsed the story in step 3, that's where the magic began to happen for him. And he created a breakthrough. We removed the facts of his story, of his life story, and the story that he was telling around his relationship with his wife, his marriage, and looked only at the interpretations he was making of his situations as a young boy living at home with a mother he thought that was lazy, emotionally unavailable, and didn't care about him, and his current situation at home with his wife. And I asked him what information both his mother and his wife were mirroring back to him, specifically the beliefs he formed about himself that they were both reinforcing. And he began to see a pattern of similarities between him and his mother, his wife and his mother. It's something he hadn't noticed before then. And when we went even deeper, he discovered that at home with his wife, her behavior made him feel he wasn't worthy of her love or being in a healthy, vibrant relationship. And that's exactly how he felt as a boy growing up at home with his mother. He had it. His core beliefs, his core limiting beliefs were, I'm not worthy and I'm unlovable. He had been suppressing those beliefs all these years, and it was being reflected back to him now in the relationship he was choosing, his marriage, because it turns out that this was a set of beliefs that had always seemed to be in the background of many of his relationship choices. So once he discovered his limiting beliefs, and I have to say that my client worked very hard on opening up to his feelings and this entire process, he was able to replace them with new beliefs that are more aligned with his authentic self. I am worthy. I am lovable. I am good enough. When he did that and really practiced feeling it, he began to see the situation at home with his wife differently. And so he approached his wife differently. And as he changed that approach and got curious about what was troubling her, that began to tell her he was interested in her. It turns out she felt unworthy because she felt the emotional connection between them was dissolving. And she was frustrated because she felt she couldn't reach him anymore. And that's when she got sad. It was when he started to express his emotions more toward her and share more with her about the things in his life that were causing stress and strain on his life, that she started to reconnect with him and things began to improve. But that's not all. When he saw how replacing his old beliefs with more empowering ones and giving more expression to his feelings had improved his relationship with his wife and his family life at home, he decided to try it on his mother too. And when he did that, he learned she opened up to him, and he learned that she had also had a very hard life. She was mistreated by her husband, his father, and had a mother that was also emotionally unavailable to her. She took that on, she took on that generational pain, allowed it to influence how she viewed life and guide her choices with respect to raising him and his sister, and eventually became the things that she didn't like about her mother. She recognized the pain that caused her son for many years, but didn't know how to give expression to it. And it was because he made the approach and expressed a curiosity to understand her better that things began to improve. He opened a door for her to walk through, so to speak. One generation helped another to find healing and acceptance. And today they talk almost every day. It's really a beautiful success story about the power of forgiveness. It took courage for him to want to break free of the familiar patterns of behavior that he recognized weren't serving him anymore. And that's true for all of us. We all have that challenge. They were continuing something he recognized as self-defeating and destructive. We all have them, and they are reinforced by the limiting beliefs we have about ourselves. And that's what we keep in place through blaming others for our situation. But blame is really just a way our ego has of giving our power away and keeping us disconnected from our authentic self. It's forgiveness that helps us take back that personal power and use it in a more constructive way.
Amazing. In your coaching, you mentioned the importance of developing new habits and skills. Could you provide some insights into the types of habits and skills that can be particularly helpful for veterans in their healing journey?
Yes, absolutely, indeed. Well, there have been some effective breakthroughs in neuroscience that help us practice reconnecting somatically with ourselves. And we do that by getting curious about what our nervous system is trying to tell us when we get upset, instead of ignoring or avoiding our emotions. So, getting curious and slowing down are two ingredients of being able to understand ourselves better. And that's a skill worth developing. Remember, the language our bodies speak is through our emotions, and our emotions help us understand whether something serves us or our basic needs are being met. So, developing a set of skills that are helpful to our overall well being is one of the types of skills that can be helpful in a healing journey. Forgiveness is another skill anyone can develop to reclaim energy we keep giving away by investing in emotions and beliefs that keep us stuck. And once you reclaim that energy, you have to do something with it quickly. Else you risk slipping back into old, familiar, self-defeating patterns of behavior that you know don't serve you anymore. That's what our ego does. It's very, very clever at convincing us to do things and think things and believe things that keep us stuck, keep us from progressing and advancing in our life. So I always recommend to my clients that they channel their energy into developing a part of their life that they've neglected. In other words, I get them to think of a goal or a project or a dream they've always had but have never pursued, presumably because the limiting beliefs they had also told them they could never accomplish that. What's the use of even trying? So that brings us to a third set of habits and skills that can be helpful in any healing journey, because it's not only about addressing the wounds of our past, it's creating new practices that ensure we don't repeat the patterns from our past that have hurt us and slowed us down, and in fact, changed the trajectory of our life. And that requires us to look at a bigger picture and create habits and practices that help us achieve a greater sense of positive awareness and aliveness in our lives. These habits open the door to creating deep connections with the most important people in our life. They help us pursue causes that give meaning and purpose to our life, and they help us to continually grow. But here's the distinction, Mohammed, I want to make. Not all habits are created equal. There are bad habits, there are good habits, there are better habits, and then there are best habits for realizing your full potential in your life and in your career. And here's what I mean by this. As traditionally conceived and understood, we think of habits creating habits when we do something so many times that it becomes almost automatic to us, like tying your shoes or driving a car or interviewing people for a podcast like you're doing right now. Do something that's easy to remember, do it repeatedly, get rewarded for it, and you'll develop a habit that becomes second nature. But that's not the kind of habits that this third set of habits and skills are. And I don't teach my clients routine behaviors that can be done with little or no conscious thought or effort. Instead, I want them to be fully aware as they fight with their struggles and strive for the mountaintop, whatever that is for them. That's because the habits that really matter in changing the trajectory of our life don't live in the subconscious, and they don't necessarily become automatic or easier with time. These habits are deliberate habits that are consciously chosen, willed into existence, and continually revisited to strengthen your character and increase your chances of success. I call these habits high performance habits. They were discovered as a result of 20 years of research. An analysis of the data revealed that all of the possible habits we can develop in the pursuit of the best life we can create for ourselves, 6 specific habits give you a competitive advantage and turn an average performer into a high performer. And these 6 habits for reaching and sustaining long-term success are clarity, energy, necessity, productivity, influence, and courage. These are the habits that veterans and first responders and other high performers do consistently from person to person when they develop relationships and be influential in them, project to project, to achieve higher goals of success, and goal to goal to create their best life. And because of the positive impact these 6 habits have on confidence and esteem, they're just as integral to healing and growth as practicing forgiveness. So they go very much hand in hand with each other.
Right. You mentioned that one cannot get to the next level of their life with the same practices that got them there. How do you guide veterans in making meaningful changes in their lives?
Yeah, great question, Mohammed. Thank you. Well, the way I work with veterans is exactly the same way I'd work with anyone who wants to make peace with their past and improve the quality of their life. It's really based on a simple principle, a simple fact, really, that if you're happy with your life the way it is right now, if you're content with what you have and don't want more, if you're satisfied with where you are, who you're surrounded by, and resigned to the idea that you'll never resolve the problems or overcome the challenges you have in your life right now, that this is what you're destined to experience, the habits and skills that got you this far in life will probably sustain you for the rest of your life. I wouldn't call someone in this category a high performer, but these are people who live, there are people who live this way and can keep doing what they're doing to stay on the same trajectory for the rest of their life. But there are some people who are hungry for more in their life. They want more aliveness. They want more happiness and better relationships with themselves, their parents, their spouse or partner, their children, their colleagues or friends. They want more fulfillment and success in their career. They want to be in better shape or get healthier. They want to know their life is meaningful and that they're serving the purpose they came into this life to serve. And I'd say if you're one of those kinds of people, you must be willing to develop the practices that are required to achieve more. The practices that got you this far won't do it for you. They were good enough to get you to the level you are now. But if you want to go higher and have more, you must be willing to learn new habits and practices and skills. So most veterans are already motivated to do this. They just need someone who can meet them where they are and help them navigate the way forward. They need someone who understands them, values them, respects them for who they are, and appreciates the sacrifices they made in service to something bigger than themselves. So it's really less about what I do and more about how motivated my client becomes to making the positive change that's necessary and change their beliefs and their own ability to figure things out. I serve as their guide or their coach or their accountability partner. Once we've made that connection and established trust between us, then it becomes about working the dynamics of our relationship in a way that motivates them to do the work on themselves. And one other thing, which I think not enough coaches are doing in the personal development space. I get to know my clients and push my clients hard because that's what they pay coaches. People pay coaches to push them to a new level of awareness or a new level of living. So I get to know their self-defeating habits and the excuses they make to justify not taking responsibility for becoming their best self. And I don't let them off the hook, because inside they know why I'm there, to help them get past the obstacles and excuses that have been in their way that they couldn't eliminate on their own. So this is where coaching and counseling are so highly complementary. Both teach you valuable skills, but where counseling is backward facing to help you make sense of the past and develop practices that help you heal those wounds, coaching is forward facing. It's concerned with helping you create your future. And that distinction is huge, Mohammed. And once you get that and understand that my role is to give you the map to shifting your mindset and navigating your life to the next level, boom, you're tapping into your greatness and moving into it. That can be a scary journey for many people until you start to see you're making progress towards your goals that were elusive up until now. Then all of a sudden, when you get it, you get so excited and you want more. You see who you can become, and you just want to continue doing the work to become more. And that's the most exciting thing about being a coach for me, to see their eyes light up when they just get it, and to watch them start making meaningful changes in their lives and moving into their greatness. That's the ultimate reward for me as a coach. And it's not just veterans or first responders that can achieve that. Anyone who wants to become more can work with a coach like you and me to do that.
That's awesome. So, can you talk about the role of forgiveness in deepening relationships, both for veterans and in general? How can forgiveness positively impact relationships?
Yeah, that's such a wonderful question, especially in these times, Mohammed. Forgiveness to me is an essential part of any successful, vibrant relationship, whether it's with yourself or with your partner, your spouse, a parent, your children, your colleagues, your community, and the world writ large. Because look, a lot of people think relationships are 50-50 and it's all about compromise. I don't agree. I think relationships are 100-100. If you want to deepen the most important relationships in your life, you have to be all in. You have to give it 100%, and so does the other person. That means things aren't going to always be perfect or easy. You're going to learn a lot about each other in that process. You're going to make discoveries and gain insights that you just didn't have before. You're going to learn so much, not just about your partner, but especially about yourself. And some of what gets revealed to you might not be very sexy or cool or comfortable, right? This is precisely where giving yourself grace becomes so important. And grace is such an integral part of the forgiveness and personal development process. And you do that, again, by learning how to forgive, not just others, but even more so yourself. I believe all forgiveness ultimately is self-forgiveness, but it's a journey to get ourselves there. And that's always been had a profound impact on the relationship we have with ourselves. It's a practice that's worth learning and building on as we learn to love ourselves more. Because the more we love ourselves, the more it just makes sense to love others and treat them with dignity and respect as well. And as we do that, our relationship choices start to change. We start choosing the people we surround ourselves with from a place of love, rather than the fear that exists in the form of our limiting beliefs and self-limiting criticism. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's completely. Thank you. And last question, what resources or training do you offer on your website for veterans and their families who may be interested in your coaching approach?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to answer that question. Well, I retired from my career this past January. So I'm now about 8 months into building this new business, this new coaching business. And I believe in focusing on just a couple of topics and building from there. So on my website, jonpauldelang.com, at the homepage, I always advertise free training that I offer on a continuous basis. I generally do a live cast for 20 to 30 minutes on Sundays at noon Eastern. I also have master classes that I give once a month. They're 3-day master classes, and they're specifically designed for people that are healing from trauma. The pace is very slow. It's one step at a time, and I have found that that's a very effective way to teach people that are on that healing journey. And finally, I have 2 or 3 programs. I do one-on-one coaching in radical forgiveness. I provide that service. I provide coaching in high performance habits, and I have an online course that's in development as well. And I invite anyone to reach out and ask me questions if they're interested, and use me as a resource if I can help in you achieve the next higher level in your life.
In closing our discussion with Jon Paul, a former Army veteran turned high performance coach, has been deeply enlightening. His dedication to fostering healing among veterans is truly inspiring. We are grateful for his valuable insights on forgiveness, habit development, and post traumatic growth. Thank you so much.